And our guest today will feed your heart. What does that mean? We're about to learn. She's a New York Times best-selling author of the books Real Happiness and Real Love, and a true pioneer in the world of mindfulness. Her name is Sharon Salzberg. Hi, Sharon.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. I'll just say a little bit about myself and then talk a little bit about the meditation we're going to do. And then we'll do some. And then we'll get to hang out and just have a conversation after that.
Great.
So I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Washington Heights, and I went to college in Buffalo, New York, State University of New York at Buffalo. And when I was in college, I found out about meditation practice, and I actually applied to this program at the university to be able to go to India and study meditations. This is like 1970. This is a really long time ago. And I had no desire really to go to India, but I looked around Buffalo and there was nothing that I could find in those days. And so I went to India and came back, finished school, and then went back to India. And I finally came back in 1974 as a meditation teacher because my own teachers had told me to teach. So I've been teaching ever since 1974. And the particular meditation I wanted us to do today, because there's so many styles and methods and things to explore, which I think is really a good attitude, is basically a kindness meditation. And what it's based on is a belief that the way we pay attention affects a lot of how we feel. Like if we think about ourselves and we pretty much just obsess with what we think is wrong with us or what other people have said is wrong with us, like the stories they tell about us, and we don't like give ourselves a break and have a bigger picture, like we have potential or there's good within us or possibility of change, any of that, then our world gets very narrow and we're very unhappy. So what we try to do is just expand the way we pay attention to ourselves. And you got to think about all the people that we come upon that we usually don't pay attention to at all. We ignore, we're indifferent to, they don't count. And I think it's such an incredible moment in time for us because the ways we have held ourselves to be separate and the thought like what happens over there doesn't matter over here, it's just exploded, right? And we see that our lives are actually connected. Doesn't mean you like everybody, but you just have this recognition that our lives are really connected. So I'd love for us to do just a little bit of that practice and experience it. So if you want to just sit comfortably, you don't have to get into some like pretzel like pose or anything, just be comfortable. And you can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. We're going to start with breathing because in a time of high tension and stress, one of the things we stop doing is breathing, right? So just take a few deep breaths and let your breath become natural. I think if there's like a couple of phrases that express what you would like to offer yourself, this is gift giving, right? So may I be happy? May I be peaceful? May I be safe? May I be peaceful? Something like that. People often say, who am I asking? Well, we're not asking anybody. We're like giving. It's like you give someone a birthday card and you say, may you have a great year. May I be safe. May I be happy. You just can repeat those phrases silently over and over again. And here's the real key to every method of meditation. You will find your attention wandering or you'll fall asleep. And the key is don't worry about that. You see you've been gone, you've been distracted. See if you can just let go and come back to that chosen object, in this case, the phrases. It's an extremely sneaky way of being kind to yourself. So let go and come back. If you have to do that over and over again, it's fine. So we are the first recipient of the loving kindness. May I be safe. Be happy. Be peaceful. And see if you can think of somebody who's helped you in some way. They've helped encourage you, or maybe you've never met them, but they've inspired you from afar. So if someone like that comes to mind, bring them here. You can get an image of them or say their name to yourself, get a feeling for their presence, and offer those phrases to them. May you be safe, be happy, be peaceful, or whatever phrases you're using. And even if the words don't seem perfect, it doesn't matter because they're carrying our intention. May you be safe, be happy, be peaceful. And think of someone who's having a hard time right now and bring them here. Then offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. May you be safe, be happy, be peaceful. And then anyone who comes to mind, we're going to have like a party. Friends, family, people you know really well, people you've never met, whoever comes to mind. Let's just bring them together in a group and offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. May you be safe, be happy, be peaceful. And we'll close with offering loving kindness in a really big way all around the world. People, creatures. May all beings be safe, be happy, be peaceful. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation.
Thank you so much for that, Sharon.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Thank you.
So this is a little bit different meditation. 2 weeks ago, we had Sebene Selassie, and she gave us a breath meditation. Last week, we had Leslie Booker, and she gave us some interesting practices of orienting to our surroundings, almost like being in the wild, and bringing the attention back in the body. So this was a kindness meditation. So, and we're going to explore exactly how this is a little bit different. But before we do that, I gathered some data from our students, and I'd like to see who and what we're speaking to right now. And it's kind of interesting. So the question was asked, how has your happiness level changed in isolation? So 38.5% said it dropped a little bit, their happiness. Another 38.5% said it dropped significantly. 15.4% said their happiness is about the same. And 7.7% said they're happier after the coronavirus. So maybe we should interview them next week, because I don't know how that could be possible, but you know something we don't. So, and I wanted to get a little more granular and figure out what their biggest stresses are right now. So here are very specific examples. Completing my schoolwork, right, because they're learning remotely. Social isolation. Losing everything is a stress. Not being able to go outside. Having thoughts about so many things and not being able to know what to do about them. Family stress, fear of the future. God forbid someone I care about gets the virus. Not having my friends and teachers to interact with. And someone said, I've lost a family member during this time. It's hard not being able to console my family. This is real stress. At the same point in time, what I wanted to do for the last 2 weeks, we've been providing tips. I wanted to tap into the wisdom of our students, say, hey, what's working for you? So here's what they said was giving them relief, so they can teach us right now. Some things: taking a deep breath, meditating. Someone said I jot down my feelings and it helps me. I'm trying to be more organized, making boundaries, communicating more and noticing my sadness, exercising, sleeping, and playing PS4. Sharon, you know what PS4 is?
I don't know what PS4 is. I was with you till then.
PlayStation 4. So it's a video game. Okay. Trying to distract myself, writing, talking to my friends as much as I can, and keeping busy. Every night before I go to bed, I think about the things that I can do better to feel better. I find myself reading a lot lately, which calms my mind. And my personal favorite, I'm trying to stay on track with my skincare. At least I can experience my skin feeling good during this epidemic.
That's an excellent thought.
We will not hate you because you're beautiful. That's great, skincare. So there's a lot here.
Yeah.
And let's address it. But before we do, you grew up in Washington Heights, right? You grew up in the same area where our kids are living and breathing right now. You went to George Washington High School.
Mm-hmm.
I know to some you had some degree of like childhood trauma that inspired your journey to go to the other end of the world to find this practice of mindfulness. This was not just a class that you took in high school. You had to go to the end of the earth to discover it. So could you speak a little bit about your early childhood and what set you on this journey?
Sure. I lived with my parents in the Bronx, actually, until I was 4 years old, and they got divorced. And then I moved with my mother. And she died when I was 9. And I went to live with my father. I mean, how much detail you want? I went to live with my father's parents, whom I hardly knew. And my father had just disappeared. I hadn't seen him at all since I was 4. And he came back when I was 11. And he was pretty severely mentally ill and alcoholic by then. And he was only home for about 6 weeks when he took an overdose of sleeping pills. And he didn't die, but he went into the mental health system, and he stayed there for another 20 years, a hospital or a nursing home or sometimes the streets, whatever. And I also had a family system, like many people do, where none of this was ever really talked about. And so I had all of these feelings of anger and fear and so much going on inside of me, but nobody ever addressed it. I mean, they thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were actually providing some comfort to me, but it left me like I had an internal world that no one was acknowledging, and I felt really lost. And it was only when I began meditating that it sort of all came together. And so I want to say I really applaud that list. I loved hearing that list of what everyone is doing, because I didn't know what PS4 was. Now I know, but I thought those are great things. And for me, it was really meditation that helped me put the pieces together in a very different way, and I still rely on for a different kind of inner strength.
But when you went to India, though, and you found this, you didn't even really know what you were looking for, though. I mean, you quite by accident kind of found this. Is that correct or no?
Well, no, I knew why I was going to India. I when I was in college, I took an Asian philosophy course, and that was an accident, because there was a philosophy requirement, and I just kind of looked at the schedule and I thought, oh, that's like on Tuesday. That's convenient. Let me do that one, and it was in that course that I heard about meditation and that it could really ease the suffering in your life. And I also heard, that in different philosophical systems, that suffering was more openly talked about in contrast to, my background. And so then I thought, oh, I'm not so weird. I'm not so different. I don't have to feel so isolated. This is just a part of life. And I heard that there were tools, there were actual practical, direct methods. And you can see, even just from your 3 weeks of experience, there are lots of different tools that you can experience. And if you really practice them, not just think about them, but if you practice them, you could be a lot happier. And I wish I could bottle what happened next, because I didn't think, maybe I'll stay here and, study this some more. I'll read more books about it. I thought, I've got to learn how to do this. I've got to make this real for me. And so I applied to this independent study program, and they accepted my project. And I went off to India to learn how to meditate. And there was a period when I first got there where I wanted something direct and practical. I didn't want philosophy or, anything I had to join or, get a new identity with. I wanted the straight stuff. And it took me a while to find that, but I finally did.
So to that point, an 11th grader named Caitlin asks the question, have you found real happiness by applying your own methods?
I feel like I have. Actually, they're not my own methods, but, I learned them, but I feel like I really have. Not that I never get overwhelmed or frightened or feel real sadness. I feel a lot of sadness now, but there are all the ways I used to pile on. I'm the only one who ever feels this. I'm ashamed of what I'm feeling. I have to hide it. Or this is the only thing I will ever feel for the rest of my life. I can see those things now, the add-ons. And that's really at the basis of a lot of what mindfulness is. It's like really beautiful, wonderful, pleasant things can arise, and sometimes we don't even notice them because we think they're not good enough, or we're just not paying attention. And really painful, difficult things arise, and we actually have the possibility of making them worse by being unkind to ourselves. I shouldn't feel this. This is wrong, and it's all my fault, and all kinds of things like that. And so I've learned how to much more quickly see those add-ons and let them go.
So that's a very important distinction. So you're not saying that by meditating, you're going to make, uncomfortable feelings go away, but rather you're going to become more skilled at navigating through them, being aware of them, and making decisions in the moment.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Because I think talk about not being fair to yourself. If you have an idea that you're going to meditate away all discomfort or unhappiness, you're going to be sitting there like judging your experience constantly, and it's not going to be that way. And yet it's a whole other life when we learn we don't have to add all that stuff to it.
Like just before we went live on this, we had a little bit of technical glitch, and you and I were kind of joking because I said, right now we're about to go live and this isn't working and it may not work. And I said, thank God I at least meditate, because right now I can take a breath and kind of center in the middle of this. I mean, this is about real life, right?
Yeah.
Like real difficulties.
Yeah.
So to that point, we have Jennifer, who is a ninth grader. She said, what are some ways to improve your own self-love? And an anonymous student said, when I look in the mirror, I hate the person I see. Will this ever change?
Yes, it can change. It absolutely can change. I mean, there are reasons for that. You know, we're not usually born hating ourselves, really, but we're conditioned in a certain way. And uh, there are lots of angles to this. You know, one is we learn to see that conditioning really quickly, not after we've, cried ourselves to sleep or, just feel like I'm not worthy of having any contact with anybody, and having it extend and really affect our decisions and our choices. You know, we can see what we're feeling pretty quickly, and we can see it for what it is. Like I sometimes give this suggestion to people, like if you have a really nasty, critical voice that comes a lot, give it a name, give it a persona, give it a wardrobe, because everything's going to depend on how you relate to it. And I named my own inner critic Lucy, with apologies to any Lucy who's listening, based on this character in the Peanuts comic strip. Because I once stayed in a friend's house, and someone had left a cartoon on the desk from the Peanuts comic strip. And in the first frame, Lucy's talking to Charlie Brown, and she says, "You know, Charlie Brown, what your problem is? Problem with you is that you're you." And then poor Charlie Brown says, "Well, what in the world can I do about that?" And Lucy says, "I don't pretend to be able to give advice. I merely point out the problem." And somehow, whenever I was walking by that desk, my eye would fall right on that line. Problem with you is that you're you. Because the Lucy dominant voice had been so strong in my earlier life, but partly mostly through the meditative process, and it actually reflects somebody that you read, said, like, I write down my feelings, I name them. That's part of the mindfulness technique, is to name what you're feeling. And so when I would hear that voice come back, and it happened very quickly after I saw the cartoon, something great happened for me. My very first thought was, it's never going to happen again. And I greeted that with, "Hi, Lucy. Chill out, Lucy." Instead of, "You're right, Lucy. You're always right. I'm worth nothing." Or on the other hand, "I can't believe I've been meditating for so long and I've worked so hard and Lucy's still here and I'm such a failure." It's like, "Hi, Lucy. I see you. Have a seat. Just chill." And so the same patterns of judgment and self-judgment can certainly arise, but we have a whole way of navigating them, which is not to get lost in them and not to feel ashamed of it. I should be beyond this or whatever. And you do, things really change when you can do that.
So when you're talking about this voice in the head, it sounds to me what you're really doing is making a distinction between thoughts not being facts.
Yeah.
Right? Because we can, especially when we're young, and even sometimes when we're older, we can hear this voice of Lucy, but not recognize it as Lucy, and just think that this is factual because it's playing over and over and over again in our mind.
That's true. And I also want to say, it could be, and usually has come from the outside in some way, but we've absorbed it. So it feels even more like a fact, but it's just a thought. And not all thoughts reflect a deeper truth by any means.
So to that point of other people's voices ending up in our own mind and hearing this, an 11th grader, Esther, says, should we take in the criticisms and feedback of other people?
I would assess them, but not necessarily take them to heart. Because you don't know where someone else is coming from. They're having a bad day, or they're stuck on some particular view of something, or but I think it's good to listen. I mean, I say that as a writer, who's, by September I'll have 11 books out, so there's always this time when people are assessing you, like what you wrote was totally worthless, or what you wrote really helped me, or whatever, and you get some of each, and you realize that, well, I should listen, in the sense of, well, is there something here for me to learn? And that's just like an honest appraisal. but there gets to be a certain point where you don't want to define yourself by the view of someone else, because you actually don't know where they're coming from in the end, or what their own idea is of offering feedback, for example. Not everyone is really skilled at that, and saying, something in a constructive way. Some people just like rant,
And some people don't always have your best interest in mind.
That's
Some
correct.
people have a toxic type personality, and they can say things that are abusive or negative. And if you don't distinguish the difference and you absorb all of that, it can take a toll on
Absolutely.
yourself.
Absolutely. So that's why also having a core sense of kind of knowing yourself and having that groundedness is a really good thing.
So to this point about being a writer and success, we had a 12th grader. Some of the kids chose to be anonymous, and I really wish they hadn't, because the questions are so great. I want to give them a shout out. A 12th grader said, "Is it true that people who are more successful are happier than others?"
Apparently not. I think some people say that emotional intelligence, is a sense of fulfillment, even more than kind of, school intelligence or cognitive intelligence, will be a marker for success. Being able to relate to people, having some empathy, understanding how to be a leader, and they say things like the best kinds of leaders are people who sort of celebrate the work of others. It's not all about them. It's being able to lift other people up and things like that. So to that extent, maybe that's true, but I feel like I know a lot of sort of successful people who are kind of miserable, and they maybe grew up with an ethic of it's a dog eat dog world, and step on anyone you need to get ahead, and no one's going to help you, so you don't help anybody else, and they seem pretty lonely to me.
So like the day you became a New York Times bestselling author, where you're like, "Hey, I'm so much happier today than I was yesterday."
I was pretty excited. I wouldn't say I was, but what was really funny, to be perfectly frank, I was only on that book was only on the New York Times bestsellers for 1 week, and which still, it's an enormous accomplishment. I have no idea how it happened, and but then whenever the publisher would say something like, "You're a New York Times bestselling author, we've got to take you out to lunch," or whatever, and I say, "Well, it was only for 1 week." And they'd say, "Well, never say that. You can't ever say that."
So to that point, Charles is a 12th grader, and he says the title of your book is Real Happiness. What is fake happiness? Good question, Charles.
It's a good question. The title of that book was, for a long time, it was going to be Why Meditate, because that's actually what the book was about. And then I got an advance copy of a friend's book, which was going to come out before mine, which was called Why Meditate. So we had to quickly change the title of my book, and the publisher came up with Real Happiness. And I thought, I'm going to get in trouble for that. And in fact, that the first time I was interviewed by a journalist, that question came up. It's not so much that it's fake happiness, but I think sometimes we hold on to things that are giving us happiness, but they're so fleeting. And, we think, oh, that's like the be all and end all. That's as happy as I'll ever get. But really, it just kind of fades. And this is such a powerful time, too, because so many of the things we counted on aren't available to us anymore. And, we have to find other sources of happiness. And I think really every time is like that. I think it's good to enjoy the good things that happen, and the pleasant experiences that come away. I don't really think they're fake, but they're not very stable. And so we'd probably be better off if we had a more stable source of happiness, and then we could just enjoy these things as they come.
And there is a difference too, right? When you get something that you like, whether it's you graduate high school or you get a car or something that you really want, and it feels really, really good, that goodness sometimes has a little bit of like agitation and tension. It feels good. It's like a euphoria, but that's like qualitatively different from just relaxing into a moment, taking a breath, and things are what they are, but you're settled in that moment. I mean, qualitatively, that's a different kind of happiness, correct?
Well, it is. It's just more reliable. It's like I got a new car a few years ago, which lives in Massachusetts, which is where I am now, not in the city. And my old car, which I was very, very fond of, was just like falling apart, and no one, my friends didn't want me to drive it anymore, even though I was very attached to it. So I got a new car, and the salesman promised me this color. It was burgundy, and he said, we look for cars up and down the East Coast. We'll get you what you want, but just in case, and the wild chance we can't, give me a second choice. So I gave him blue. And when the car arrived, it was blue. And it's actually a blue that I normally like. It's a shade of blue I actually like quite a lot. But if anybody asked me for the first 2 weeks what color my car was, I would say not maroon. And now I look back and I think, why was I so, like that? I like that color. It's fine. But it wasn't what I had thought I needed. And so we can trip ourselves up a lot too with being too narrow in what we think we need in order to be happy.
So the expectations that we put into something also affects our experience of it.
Yeah.
So we have Damien with us live. Damien, you can unmute yourself. I know you have a question for Sharon, and you can put your video on.
Hey, Sharon.
Hey.
My question is, like, during like this whole pandemic period, how I supposed to how is everybody like supposed to like feel during this time? Like, because like to me, I feel like kind of lost like in my feels. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't know if there's a certain way we're supposed to feel. I think we can learn what helps us feel more connected to others, or what helps us feel a little more grounded ourselves, and go for it. That's what's really important. I think there will be waves of grief and fear and being lost. I mean, it's just like, I had a lot of expectations for my coming year, and I don't know if any of them are gonna be met. And it's the weirdest feeling of like, oh, I don't know. But what I do know is that if I try to help one other person, and even if it's a small way, like an older person who I know is pretty cut off, is kind of lonely, just giving them a call if I have their number, or sending them a note, or even the meditation we just did, which is a way of affirming connection, I think is really important. And it helps me, it helps me feel the connection that is really, I think, the most important thing to feel. Or I know if I stop and I take a few breaths before I answer an email or respond to somebody, I'm going to do it from a better place, and I'll be more grounded. And I also know, and this is a part of meditation too, that it's part of what meditation gave me, is that I don't blame myself for what I feel, when it feels crummy and not that welcome. It's what's happening, and it's the truth of what's happening right now. And there's nothing wrong with what we feel, whether it's lost and confused or something painful. But there are also ways of relating to ourselves in that feeling so that it doesn't become so solid and so enduring as it might have.
So I can imagine myself being 14 or 15 years old, and I probably would have rejected the meditation.
Yeah.
But forget about the loving kindness. I could have, even when I was first introduced to it as an adult, I'm like, what is this hippie stuff? We're going to sit there and love the world and all. So we had someone ask the question, what is the point of being kind to people who do not show kindness in return?
Well, first I want to say that I understand that. And, there's a reason why we practice things like the breath and mindfulness. I have gotten a lot from this particular meditation, and I know it can make you really squeamish, or or as people say to me, I wanted to throw up when you first told me about it. And I understand that. So then it's up to you if you want to experiment with it. But for me, so much has come from this sense of connection. And it's also the truth of life, like somebody sent me a quote from me, something I said in like 2012 or 2014. And I said, the truth that our lives are all connected, that we live in an interconnected universe. Science shows us this. Economics shows us this. Environmental consciousness certainly shows us this. Even epidemiology shows us this. Like, I've been talking about epidemiology all these years because I have a friend who I've known since the early 70s in India who is an epidemiologist who's very active in the anti-smallpox campaign.
Explain what that is for kids. Epidemiology.
Sure. Like, an epidemiologist is somebody who will study the course of diseases. Like right now, they're the people that are studying the spread of the virus and what seem to be the conditions that make it spread and where it's spreading and how to address that. And so my friend worked in the anti-smallpox campaign in India, which ended up eradicating smallpox from the face of the earth, which was an incredible feat. And so he's like my go-to guy whenever I have a question, about any of this. So I've been saying epidemiology all these years. And it's so weird, because the idea that we live in a really confused way ordinarily is that what happens over there doesn't have anything to do with me. Right. Whether over there is down the block or across the city or the other end of the world, has nothing to do with me. This is not going to come over here. Well, guess what? That's not the nature of things. And that's why this idea of loving kindness is actually pretty powerful, because it reflects the truth that our lives are all connected. So I see it as an experiment if you feel like doing it. And why be kind to someone who's not going to be kind to you? I think that takes a lot of exploration. It's not like you want to give in or try to appease people or make nice or say they're right, because maybe they're very wrong. But sometimes we get obsessed with someone else's bad behavior, and it's all we think about. And we, it's like I said before, you take it in, you like suck it in some way, and it affects us too much. And so what we want to do is to have some space, and say, you're acting in this totally creepy way that I'm not going to absorb that. If your actions are affecting me, I'm going to see what I can do to protect myself or make you not so powerful or whatever it is. Like voting. And, there are things that we need to take action on. So that doesn't mean that you want to be sitting there all day thinking, God, I hate them. And, they're so awful, because it'll just take over us.
And it doesn't mean you're a doormat either. It doesn't mean if someone's being abusive to you, or if like my neighbor's a jerk, it doesn't mean like, hey, hi, let's be friends because I want to be kind to you because I'm practicing this meditation. It's not saying that, but it's saying if I dwell on him being a jerk, it's going to make me feel bad. So if I can sit there in my own mind, even without interacting with him, if I can send him, kindness in my own mind, it'll help me.
That's right.
Damien.
I was just gonna say that you don't forgive someone for them. You forgive them for yourself, because it's supposed to make you feel better, because you putting off that strain of hating someone, because that strain of hating someone, because I hated a couple of people, and I forgave them because I felt like it was controlling me, and like every time I saw them or thought about them, it hurt me. It didn't hurt them. So why was I hating them so much? So that's why I forgave them. But it's not that. But you forgive, but you don't forget.
That was perfect. Thank you so much.
Out of the mouths of babes, right? So he just clarified what the two adults were like, couldn't get to. So, the question is raised, is this stuff, and this is a kid asking this, is this stuff scientific? Is this science-based, or is this just like wishy-washy? Let's wish people well and it'll make us feel better. But there's any science behind this?
There's growing science behind it. Like in the last many years, most of the research has gone toward mindfulness techniques. And now there's actually a growing body of research about these particular techniques, loving kindness, developing compassion. There was a big study out of Emory University in the foster care system in Georgia that, taught basically what we did together to a bunch of the kids. And that was a very biological study. They did a lot of stress hormones and things like that. And they found huge changes in the amount of stress that people were going through, as showed by their cortisol and all these levels of different hormones that get spiking when there's stress, when there's big stress. And there have been many increasing studies.
I know one hormone that gets released when you practice this loving kindness is something called oxytocin. Oxytocin, they call it the love hormone, but this is really why we're genetically wired. If we see a little baby and all of a sudden we go, little baby, it's a release of oxytocin and it feels good. So when you actually practice these kindness phrases in your own mind, it releases oxytocin. You begin to feel better. It's neurologically wired into you. Now, that's for an individual, for us, but like you were saying, when you take groups of people, we've seen in school-wide, like we've implemented the mindfulness. That, and in addition to other, social emotional measures we've implemented, the kind of school culture, we've seen a 50% drop in disciplinary incidents. And that's like, those are hard numbers, but when you actually walk in the building, you can feel that something's different, to the point where, I'm the dean of the school. I'm like the head of discipline, that's not a stressful job. And I've had kids come up to me and they're like, you're taking our high school away from us. We want to see more fights. But it's actually, it's lowered this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we've also measured it too, the kids that take mindfulness in this mindful fitness class that we've been doing since 2014. And there's like a 10% lowering of anxiety across the board, roughly a 10% increase of self-esteem, and the ability to concentrate, to focus attention improves like 10%. Which, when I was a kid, I don't know about you, in the 60s in George Washington High School, I was told, pay attention, but I was never told how to do it.
That's right.
Was that your experience?
Absolutely.
So this idea of repeating these phrases, a student asked, aren't we just forcing our feelings by doing this? And isn't that bad? Isn't it fake?
Well, that's also a really good question and a common question. Like a natural question. I don't teach it so that you're supposed to be feeling something. I teach it so that we're making a switch in how we pay attention. If you're forcing a feeling, then it could be really phony, and that doesn't appeal to me. I just teach it like, okay, you spend all your time usually criticizing yourself. Try this. What's it like when you're wishing yourself well instead? Because that part of us is also true, but doesn't get a lot of airtime. So it's not like a phony thing, like I adore myself or whatever. But it's moving to what's probably unfamiliar territory. Or when we think of somebody we should have a lot of gratitude toward, but we never kind of stop and think, oh, they did a lot for me. And so we do stop and we call them to mind and we use the phrases with them. Or there's the person really that we tend to overlook, and, near stranger, somebody who we see now and then. Or what happens when we just stop and say, well, they're like a person like me. They want to be happy like I do. And they face loss and difficulty like anybody does sometime. And then you wish them well. So it's really, I don't think it works when you're trying to force a feeling.
So it's not really about the feelings, it's about the intention
Yeah.
behind the practice and what you're doing.
Yeah. You know, and so what may shift I mean, we'd all probably like that great burst of loving feeling, you know, but it may not be like that at all. It could be a shift in worldview, or that person counts too, you know, or I got to try to think of a solution that includes more than just me, or I've got to include me. I always leave myself out, you know, I count too, or something like that.
I've had kids tell me, I hated my mom, or I had it difficult, and I did this over a couple days or a few weeks or something, and then suddenly I looked at my mom and I'm like, wow, she's really tired right now. She's got a lot on her plate. I mean, that's the kind of shift that can happen,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
So Sharon, this has been hugely beneficial for me personally. I can only imagine how it will impact the people who are watching this right now. You have an audience of New York City public school kids. By the way, welcome back to the Department of Education, Sharon.
Thank you.
Some people never come back, but you're here. Is there anything that we've missed that you'd like to share with everyone before we close?
No, maybe I'll say one thing just in terms of something you said, which is really, if you choose to practice meditation of whatever kind, you don't do it to become a great meditator. You do it because it has some effect in your life. So if you're trying to figure out if it's worth continuing, like you tried a little bit and you want to figure out if it's worth it, you know, and you're not like floating in the air in the morning when you're sitting, doesn't matter. Really just look at your life and you'll see the difference.
And that's what we need right now, right? It's springtime outside, and it's just a reminder that we can begin again. Every moment we can start fresh. You see the birds in the sky, this will pass, COVID will pass. And how can we develop our mind, and as Sharon is saying, our heart, so that maybe at the other end of this COVID, we can be kind of a different person, maybe a little bit of a happier person. So with that in mind, Sharon, I want to thank you so much for spending your time, your expertise with us right now. Really a blessing for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.
Next week on the program, we have an expert in task management from a mindful perspective. His name is George Pitagorsky, and he's going to tell us how we can relax in all of our Google Classroom assignments, and even for the staff, how we can work in a way that's a little more integrated, a little more calming, and a little more productive. So very exciting. That's 1 week from today. So till then, everyone, stay calm and connected. Be safe.